35 weeks na po tayo out of 52 weeks of this preparation for our gratefulness that God gave us the Catholic faith. Our desire po talaga, di ba, to share this to the next generation. And we are ending now the second segment of the third season. Yung first, di ba, na pag-usapan natin, the incarnate Word, the incarnate Son of God. Dito, the obedient Son. So after this, next week, papasok po tayo sa third segment. Secret muna po, So let's start with reflecting on a text of the scriptures, a letter to the Hebrews.
In the days when he was in the flesh, he offered prayers and supplications with loud cries and tears to the one who was able to save him from death. And he was heard because of his reverence. Son, though he learned obedience from what he suffered. And when he was made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation for all who obey him.
So mga kapatid, we have seen the same page in our episode last week. Son though he was, he learned obedience through suffering. It is in this text of the letter to the Hebrews that we find this. Alam niyo mga kapatid, when we talk about Jesus Christ, we realize na in fulfilling the Father's love for all of humanity, he realized it was to die on the cross. And so therefore today, as we reflect on this letter to the Hebrews, we will find out that such profound love of God that Jesus wanted to somehow make his own did not come romantically. Kasi po, holding hands po ang gusto natin, di ba? Pagtungkol sa loving. Holding hands like this, But the truth is, love is a whole process. And for Jesus, it was also a learning process. This happens when a person, a man, a woman, embraces fully the mystery of becoming truly human. And Jesus had to embrace to become one of us. To share in that humanity was not lip service. It meant, like the face of this lady, to undergo travails, to undergo pains and tribulations, as it says in the reading, evoking loud cries and tears of terror and anxiety. Jesus is an everyman, a spiritual writer once wrote. Though he is divine, becoming truly and equally human, it made him undergo the natural process of learning and even passing through different stages of what we would call human maturity. It's so cute to be a baby. It's so cute to just somehow rest in one's mother's arms and sleep and drink milk from her breasts. But to grow up, that's a different thing. And Jesus is said in this letter to the Hebrews is not just a person who is a model, but it says he is the source of man's salvation. A man who fully embraces the consequences of being human, dependence, limits, needy, weaknesses. He submits himself to the power of the divine. And so, to be truly human, it meant for Jesus to be humble, to be lowly before God, but also to be compassionate, to be able to open one's hands to whatever God wishes a person to undergo and also to do as mission. Humility and compassion become the marks of growth in the spiritual life. And this is what I tried to find of a person who can give us a testimony in what way his life was brought to a certain moment of humiliation, of being lowered down. But because of his great love for his family, and especially for his parents and his siblings, he was willing to undergo that. Let's have him with us.
I was brought up to a loving family. Me and my siblings love our parents so much because we really felt loved. Though they were not vocal about it, their action says it all. That is why obeying them was easier most of the time because we knew that whatever they will ask us to do is for our good. So I really wanted to give back to them. In college, I studied physical therapy. I studied hard, knowing that it will be one step closer to my goal to give back to my parents. I came to know a group named Christ Youth in Action, and they introduced me to a personal relationship with our Lord Jesus Christ. My life really changed, and I was so happy. It also helped me focus on my studies, and I graduated. While reviewing for the board exam, I was invited to Ang Lingkod ng Panginoon Manila and was part of their very first Christian Life series. I finished the CLS and started attending regularly, but when I passed the board exam, I slowly took Lingkod for granted and focused on setting up my career. I said to myself, I have a personal relationship naman with Jesus. Now I can focus on my career and give back to my parents as originally planned. So I started applying for a job, and tulad ng na-experience ng karamihan, I found out how difficult it is to find one. I applied both locally and internationally, and I failed. To make matters worse, my father died of a heart attack. I blame myself for not being able to help and take care of my dad's health. At the same time, being the eldest, I felt the burden to provide and take care of my family. So, finding a job immediately was important. Since I had a hard time applying as a physical therapist, I looked for a career in the call center. And you know what? It was a perfect fit. I got promoted in 6 months, and my salary kept going higher as I transferred to one call center to another. I did not have a problem providing for my family's needs. In fact, I felt important and financially secured. The only setback is I learned a lot of bad things. In my graveyard shifts, I learned to smoke, which helps me to be awake in the evening, and drink to help me sleep in the morning. Worst of all, I forgot to pray. I no longer went to Mass and lost my prayer time. My personal relationship with Jesus was gone. One day, my mom started getting sick. We brought her to really good doctors to be well, but in the end, despite of everything, she died. My life was wrecked. I felt that I lost purpose. There's no one for me to care for. My parents both died, and my siblings, they don't need me. They were already doing great in their career. I felt there was no longer anything to live for or work for. So I tried to be happy by drinking and partying, and it just would not help. One drunk night, I found myself praying and challenging God to take me. I even gave him a deadline of a week to show me a new purpose. And after a couple of days, I received a call from one of my leaders in CYA. She was working as a physical therapist in Don Bosco, and she needs a replacement as she found a job in the US. I remembered that drunk night that I prayed and said to myself, maybe this is what God is showing as direction. So I went for it. I went to the HR to submit my resume, and the HR noticed that I placed there that I was a member of Lingkod ng Panginoon. Well, actually, at that time, I was no longer a member of Ang Lingkod ng Panginoon, but I usually place that so that I can easily get in or land a job in the call center. Well, anyway, I said, yes, I was a member and I'm part of Lingkod, Manila. And she told me, what a coincidence. I'm also from Lingkod, Manila. It was embarrassing, but she understands. She asked me to attend the next prayer meeting, and because I wanted to get the job, I said yes. Well, that simple yes brought me back to God. After that night, with the grace of God and support from my brothers and sisters in Lingkod ng Panginoon, I made it back in His loving hands. I realized by hindsight that all the suffering and pain led me to where I belong. But of course, my life after that was still not easy. Remember, God offered a cross when He asked us to follow Him. So hardship and suffering was still greatly part of my life. Let me share to you three instances when I obeyed God, obeyed His will, even as I know that it will be difficult. The first one, completing my comeback. So to let's continue with my story. So basically, when I went back to Lingkod ng Panginoon, Manila, I gave up 40,000 salary per month to 10,000. So a quarter of my normal salary. I was pretty anxious at that time as I do not know how I will survive with 10,000 pesos. But because I wanted to continue my newfound desire to know God and um, really deepen my faith, I braced myself for the challenge, and I was also quite excited on what God will do to me. Well, in the beginning, it was quite difficult. I had to simplify my life from someone who spends around 30,000 a month um, to now just a fraction, and give up, of course, my addictions of smoking, drinking, and partying. Well, both easier said than done. Simplifying and removing my addiction really was a cross I had to bear. But on the other hand, I was happier with what I was doing. Through my prayer time and studying the scripture, I was able to know my faith more. Attending Lingkod events and serving my brothers and sisters provided me support and overwhelming joy. Putting me into a situation outside my comfort zone allowed me to nourish and grow in my faith. I was freed from my addictions and hang ups. I was also freed from the despair of losing my parents. Because of all of this, I was thirsty to give back to God. At this time, I was thinking of doing it full time as a missionary. Um, I did my state of life discernment and considered priesthood, single blessedness, or getting married. Second one, a change of my career. So, my state of life discernment ended with me deciding to be a married person. But despite the choice, I was keen to be a missionary and raise a missionary family. One day I met Father Francis in the infirmary. I was his physical therapist, and right after his operation, one day in one of our sessions, I shared to him my desire to be a missionary. To my surprise, he told me that I cannot be a missionary as I lack the tools and knowledge I can contribute to the mission. Maybe if I study theology, then maybe I can. So I was kind of sad about what he told me, as definitely I will not be able to study because of my salary in the infirmary. But to my surprise, Father offered me through his family a scholarship. I was so happy. While going home, I suddenly realized that I was getting old and started doubting myself if I could finish my studies. I heard from friends that studying theology was difficult, but because I knew that it is God's will for me, I went for it. After a couple of years, I finished my study and even graduated with honors. I was happy, and finally, I feel I can now be a missionary. I offered my master's degree to God and told Him to send me where I can be Jesus to many. After a couple of months after graduation, I was back full time with Father Francis as his PT because he had another surgery. I accompanied him in a retreat where I had to move him around, in his wheelchair and walker. Um, the retreat is for a school in Laguna where Father, out of nowhere, asked the principal if they need a CLE teacher. And they said yes, they need one. Father then, without my permission, offered my services, and I was asked to come by and bring my resume. When I arrived, I gave the resume to the human resource personnel and, to my surprise, asked me to prepare for a teaching demo. At the end of the day, I was offered a position. I was so surprised and at what was happening then. So I called Father Francis and told him what was happening. And I can still remember what he told me. He said, maybe PJ, the school is your mission field. This is maybe where God is sending you. So I suggest that you accept the offer. I asked the HR to give me a day to decide, and I prayed. I argued with God about the transition from PT to teaching, Not to mention that Laguna is quite far and I had to move and leave everything behind. At the end of my wrestling with God, I said yes to His will and became a teacher. Third, transitions and decisions. Before accepting the teaching position, I was already preaching in Lingkod. So I said to myself, maybe the transition might be easy, uh, but no, it was not. Teaching and preaching were totally two different things. As a teacher in high school, um, I not only have to deal with making sure I make very good lessons, but also have to do paperwork. Of course, being a PT has some note taking, but a teacher's admin task is a mountain of things to accomplish every day. So, despite the difficulty of the transition, one joy it brought me was my students. Reading their reflections, getting to know them, allowed me to become Saint John Bosco, my favorite saint. With God's grace, I persevered and thrived with the challenges of the transition. After 1 year, the SCG sisters offered me to study Masters in Educational Leadership, my second master's degree, which I accepted. And after graduating, I was picked to become an assistant principal. Together with this was that I finally found the person God sent for me to marry. And I even proposed in the school's chapel. Again, I entered another transition from being single to a married person. Then, when Johan came, there goes the transition from a husband to a father. One challenge that I had to endure also was traveling from Quezon City to Laguna every day. It was quite a struggle, but I managed, knowing that when I go home, I will see Rose and Johan. There certainly are more transitions to come, but if I put all my trust in the Lord, I know I can overcome the struggle and challenges that comes with it. One of the ways God has helped me is my community. I am currently part of a covenanted community, ang ligaya ng Panginoon. Through the community, I receive support and through the example and guidance of my leaders, I'm able to adjust at the different transitions I have to go through. In conclusion, there is no conclusion as life continues. Suffering comes with life. God so loved us that He wanted to show us that He was willing to suffer with us. He loved us so much that He showed us through Jesus that if we obey His will and embrace our sufferings, we will find joy everlasting. I hope that my life has inspired you to also choose the same path I have chosen, to give your all to a God that loves us so much. Do not be afraid of the pain and struggles in following Him. As Pope Francis said, never be afraid to give your all to God, because as you give your all, you will receive everything. Thank you for listening, and may